This is the Building Automation Monthly Podcast with Phil Zito, episode 126. Hey folks, Phil Zito here, and welcome to episode 126 of the Building Automation Monthly Podcast. And in this episode, we are going to be diving through how do you optimally use a building automation system as an operator / owner. This is a question that we've been getting quite a bit lately. This is something that a lot of our customers have asked us, hey, when are you creating an owner course? When are you creating a course to teach operators how to utilize a building automation system? Because we've all been there where we've executed a project. In the specification, it says, hey, you've got 40 hours to go and do BAS training, but it ends up being about 8 to 12 hours because everyone's busy. The owner's trying to get the building occupied, and it just never ends up panning out. I mean, maybe it does in a small amount of cases, but on the large scale of things, it really just doesn't pan out. So what I want to point out to you is one thing, really, before we start to dive into this topic. So this topic came about because we got a listener voice question on our website where we had a listener come in and say, hey, I'm facing an issue related to my building automation system. I want to understand the things I can do to optimally use my BAS. What can you tell me to do? And as we started to think about this, kind of focus in, initially, the question was, hey, what should I do as far as reporting? What should I do as far as trending? What should I do as far as alarming? Now, those are good questions to ask, and those are definitely tools that you should utilize with your building automation system. But the real question is around how do you optimize that BAS? Now, if you have a question similar to that, or you just have a question about BAS in general, I'd encourage you to go to buildingautomationmonthly.com and just click on the Ask Us a Question orange button in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen if you're on a desktop. If you're on a phone, I think it pops up in the middle of the screen if I remember correctly. But go there and just leave a voice question. Would love to answer it in an upcoming episode of the podcast. Now, done a lot of customer onboarding. The first couple years of my career were focused on customer service, specifically retrofits, system integration, troubleshooting, very complex troubleshooting. And the latter end of my career was focused on helping owners identify what use cases they wanted to do in their buildings and then piecing together the proper technology sets to achieve those use cases. So this was really high-end systems integration and the deepest sense of the phrase systems integration. It wasn't just discovering a BACnet chiller and saying, oh, I'm a system integrator because I can discover BACnet IP and pull it into another BACnet IP system. That is not system integration. That's something else. But we were actually doing really in-depth, deep-level system integration using APIs and programs and custom code and all sorts of jazz. But at the end of it all, there was a pattern that played out. The businesses that had well-functioning facility teams, the businesses that were able to intake customer complaints, that being tenants, that being whoever their customer of the building was, being able to intake those issues and then properly prioritize, rank, structure, and react to those issues, those companies, the thing that came back again and again is they were accomplishing a 4-step process. They had analyzed how they were going to use the building automation system. And then they created a fundamental system or a fundamental process that they implemented. And then they set up that process, and then they optimized that process as time went on. Now, let's dive into the first step of this 4-step process, which is analyzing existing use. So there's a lot to analyzing your building automation system. And quite honestly, it starts before you even buy it. Now, for those of you who are like, well, I've already bought a BAS, I already have one, I'm not going to be buying one anytime soon. This is still important for you to know because if you're going to be doing any form of retrofit, if you're going to be doing any form of tenant improvement, this is a process you're going to want to become very familiar with. So right now, a lot of building automation systems, what happens is that folks will go to an engineer and they'll say, hey, I have this and I want to do this, and then that engineer comes up with a guide spec or a boilerplate spec and says this is what you should use based on what you want to do. Now that works for a lot of buildings, and that's all well and good, and quite honestly, a good chunk of you would be fine to use that process. But if you want to go deeper than that, if you want to go beyond that, then you really got to understand, how am I going to be using this building automation system as part of my building processes? So for example, a commercial office building, you may have 10, 20, 30 commercial office buildings, maybe a lot more in your business portfolio. And you may be saying to yourself, something I want to do is I really want to have decentralized, or rather centralized maintenance. And so what I want to do is I want to have one maintenance person who then either utilizing a network of subcontractors or utilizing a network of on-site staff is need to be able to triage issues and then be able to go and address those issues. Well, if you look at that outcome that you want, right? Well, then you're going to need a building automation system that is going to be able to consolidate into a single user interface. So you're going to want to make sure all the different BASs that are going into these different buildings are going and being able to connect into this centralized front end. And then you want that front end to be able to remotely access those buildings. You want to have the right data points. Now you may be feeling a little overwhelmed. You may be saying to yourself, Phil, how do I know that? Well, that's where the beauty of this RFI, RFQ, RFP process comes in. And I find a surprising amount of folks don't really know how to use this to their benefit. So a request for information is quite simply you're going and saying, hey, I want to accomplish this, but I'm not quite sure how. Can you tell me how? So RFI would be you'd go to several different controls counters, tell them, I want a centralized user interface. I want it to log into all these different BASs. Some of them are existing, some of them aren't existing. I want to know how I would do this. And they would all respond with these different inputs, the responses to your RFI. You would then take that RFI response and then you would package that into kind of a set of qualifications where now folks would do an RFQ. They would respond to that set of qualifications. And then from there, they would propose. And that's where you would evaluate the proposal, the RFP response. And by doing this, you're much more likely to get the result of the system you want. Now, in a lot of cases, you can utilize an engineer to do this. And I would recommend you utilize a controls engineer, a good consulting engineer to come alongside you. They have processes and they have template documents that will help guide you through these steps. However, if you can't afford an engineer and you feel like you can't do this, that's not correct. You still can accomplish this. And a lot of you who already have all your built up buildings, you can accomplish this on tenant improvements. You can accomplish this on retrofits. Heck, you could accomplish this as part of your service contracts where you want to have a specific kind of service. You want to have a specific kind of outcome in your building. Well, you can get other folks who are these controls experts to go and respond to you with their recommendations through that RFI, RFQ, RFP process. So essentially, you submit out that RFI and you get the ideas. Then you consolidate the best ideas out of those responses that you get, and that becomes your RFQ. And this is also where you'll start to design a building spec. Now, some of you are like, Phil, you said we're going to cover how an operator can utilize a BAS. One of the biggest issues tend to find for the operator is not that operators are incapable of utilizing a BAS, but that the BAS is not properly set up for the operator to utilize it. The graphics are confusing. They have only one type of user. People are getting data points that mean nothing to them, nor should they even have access to them. For example, why would the VP of facilities need to have a dashboard that has K factors on it? They wouldn't. They would just need to simply know kind of a couple different reports and metrics, and maybe they don't even need to know that. And this is where your specification that you'll create is going to be highly important to you. You're going to create the specification, and this specification is then going to be, along with a scope of work, what folks are held to when they qualify. Now, what does a specification look like? Well, It has point standards, recommended sequences, graphics, etc. Now you once again may be saying to yourself, but Phil, I don't know what points to ask for, what controllers. I don't even know how BAS should be architected. I don't know what graphics. These are all things you can ask for through the RFI process, and it's very important for you to be comfortable with that. Now, I know some of you who are listening in our audience, you're technicians, you're in sales, you're in engineering, and right now you're feeling, Phil, what does this have to do with me? Well, it has everything to do with you, because one of the ways that you can add a tremendous amount of value to your owners, and ultimately your customers, you pay your paycheck, is by guiding them through these kind of processes, by being a value add partner who helps them achieve a specification, who helps them achieve a standard by which they procure and manage their building automation system. So this RFI, it's going to create a living, breathing specification. And if it's not perfect at first, that's cool. I'll be honest with you, a lot of buildings have no specification, have no standard. They just literally go with whatever the engineer hands to them. So you're better off than most if you're even making baby steps towards having a standard. Now, once you've done the RFI, this is where you would move on to the RFQ. And if you're looking for a template, this is something that we cover in our Building Automation Systems A to Z training program. We have an entire chapter on how the procurement process works, how to create BAS standards, along with a BAS standard template that you can utilize. And if you want more info, you can find that at buildingautomationmonthly.com/126. Now, as I mentioned, from the RFI, we move into the RFQ. This is where we qualify folks. We make sure they can actually do stuff, and we dig out any last-minute questions. This is where you're really going to want to go and make sure that you're visiting any example sites, especially if you're doing something complex. You know, like commercial office building, it's not highly complex, but if you're doing a healthcare system with all sorts of integrated systems, you may want to go and validate that the person who is qualifying has actually done this before and talk to their customers and make sure it all works. And then from there, we move into RFPs, which I'm not going to spend a whole ton of time on. This is just where you get your proposals and you evaluate them. And you make decisions based on the team that you feel not only most comfortable with installing, but also servicing you post-installation. You know, first cost is important. I get it. We all have budgets. We all have capital allotments as far as what we can spend. However, realize that you are buying a team whenever you go and purchase from a specific contractor. And so make sure that that team is the team you want supporting you after the building's built. Now, you may be saying, as I mentioned, Phil, I've got an existing building. How do I do any of this? Should I do any of this? Does it even make sense to do this? Well, here's what I recommend with those of you who have existing buildings. And this is something we work with our consulting clients. And it's something that is, you know, a very valuable process. And I call this the normalization process. And through the normalization process, one of the first steps we're going to do is called a health check. We're going to make sure you have your operation and maintenance manuals, and we're going to make sure they contain a full submittal set. You'd be shocked, or maybe you wouldn't, how many O&M manuals contain, you know, the wrong product specifications, the wrong manuals, the wrong control submittals. I've actually seen O&Ms that were packaged up with control submittals from other projects. So you want to make sure all of that's set up is true. You want to make sure you have alarms and trends on the correct points and that you have reporting that supports your business processes. Do you have a centralized triage person who goes through ranks, issues, and then dispatches to team members? Well, then we want to go and have reports that that person can utilize. Do you have a decentralized structure where everyone is addressing the BAS system? Well, then we're really going to want to have some audit trails and make sure that we know what folks are doing, who's doing it, when they're doing it, so that way we can manage what's going on. We're going to want to make sure we have correct graphics flow for the user type, making sure that within 2 to 3 clicks they can get to the right thing. Because let's be honest, we don't have a shortage of things to do, but we do have a shortage of talented people to do those things. And so with that shortage of talented folks, we need to get folks to the correct screen or the correct set of data so that they can do their tasks as fast as possible. Now, at this point, you may not know how to set these things up. You may not know even what a report or alarm summary or graphics flow, any of that is. Don't worry, as we move through the other steps in this 4-part series, we're going to go through those in fairly great detail. We're going to spend a lot of time on them. And I believe we're going to cover kind of how to go through the O&Ms in next week's episode. So once you've gone through your health check, now you're going to begin to gradually implement changes and you're going to optimize. So that process right there, right? We said that we're going to start with analyzing our existing use. Then we're going to get back to our basics. Then we're going to set up our process and then we're going to optimize our process. We went through how to go and kind of create that baseline for our BAS system. And we talked through the health check of making sure that we have the proper documentation. But how do we go through and analyze existing use and processes? Well, the best way I've found to do this is to follow someone through a complete service call or a complete service or a troubleshooting call. So what you would do is you would go and you would wait for a trouble call to come in. And then you would follow that person through. You would say, how is that troubleshooting call triaged? I mean, how is it even captured? Is it captured by someone in the hallway saying, hey, it's cold in this place? And then it's never logged anywhere and it's just stuck in that person's head and hopefully it gets fixed? Or does it come through a formalized web interface where people enter their complaint and then it goes into a queue and is addressed based on severity? There's opposite ends of the extreme, and each one can work in different situations, but you have to know how data is ingested, how it enters the system. Then, once it enters that system or process, how is it addressed? Is it then dispatched to a person? Is that person then properly equipped to immediately address the issue, or are they being utilized as kind of a first responder to say, hey, this is the issue, I need to get this person in? And this is where those of you who are listening who are contractors, you can actually take what I'm teaching you right here and apply it to your own service business. This is not just for owners, this is also for service providers who do managed service or retrofits or anything like that, that you can go and take this process that I'm teaching you here and use it to analyze your existing processes and optimize them. So you've went through, you figured out how things enter the process, how you ingest the issue. Then you figured out how you assign it to someone. Next, you know the level of skill's the word I'm looking for, of the person who it's being assigned to. And the idea here is to see how many steps it takes in order to solve the issue. Once you've done that a handful of times, you'll start to notice inefficiencies. Maybe it's just a voice handoff. Someone calls a person and that person, if they get the call, great. They go and they dispatch someone. If they don't get the call, it may sit in their voicemail queue for 2-3 days. Well, then in that case, you may say, hey, maybe a web interface would be better. And then we can have that automatically managed by a low-cost person. Maybe we're paying them $10 an hour to just prioritize and send it to the right person. This is a decision you can make. And what you want to look for as you analyze your existing use is you want to look for inefficiencies. Now, part of this is experience. Part of this is just having done this for a while. You're able to notice common areas of inefficiency. Others are just pure common sense. If the troubleshooting issue goes to someone's voicemail, and there's the potential for that person to be gone fishing for 3 days and it never get relayed on to someone else, that's an inefficiency. And it's quite easy to address. It could be as simple as an email address that someone sends it to, or as complex as a web interface. But you make a choice as to how that data gets collected. And then you make a choice as to, do we do triage? Do we have the staffing to do triage? To go and do a first responder assessment and then properly send that to a skilled team member? This is also where you ask yourself, am I structured in such a way that I have maybe a controls lead and he has an electrician and a mechanic that work with him? Or do you have just everyone and they're all on a flat kind of structure and it's just whoever responds, and it's a jack of all trades scenario where, he or she who's responding, it just is dependent on the skill set they have. So this is another area where you make a decision. So that is in the response aspect, right? Now, in an ideal world, and we'll talk about this when we get to step 4, optimizing the BAS usage, you want to get to a proactive scenario where you're using reporting, analytics, trending, alarming, and you're using all of this to essentially showcase, what's the word I'm looking for? Yeah, showcase the vital signs, to essentially be reports of the vital signs of your building systems, so that you can make proactive changes, whether in maintenance, whether in troubleshooting, whether in set point adjustments for optimum performance. But right now, and in a lot of cases, we're going to be just focused on the reactive stuff. Okay, so we've went through a lot here in this 20-minute episode. I'm going to try to keep these episodes a little bit shorter, just because I realize that you may be in a car and you may want to listen to this 1 or 2 times, because there's a lot of step-by-step processes that you're going to want to be able to write down and be able to address. And so let's recap real quick. Overall, there's a 4-step process that we teach our consulting clients, and it's to analyze existing use, getting back to basics, setting up your process, and then optimizing your process. So those are the 4 steps that we utilize. Of this first step, the analyzing existing use, we talk about getting the right parts and pieces in place from the get-go, which is through that RFI, RFQ, RFP process, as well as just validating the existing documentation you have if you're not building something, but rather you're just taking ownership of something, or you are in responsibility of maintaining something, making sure you have the right data, making sure you have the right alarms, graphics, trends, O&M manuals, documentation, submittals, etc. Then we talked through our process of essentially a walkabout, right? You're walking around following the common patterns of how you respond, because most of what eats up folks' time is responding to troubleshooting calls. Maintenance for a building automation system is fairly simple, but it's often the troubleshooting that eats up a lot of the time of the skilled labor that we are in such dire need of, because a lot of us don't have enough skilled labor around BAS. So you want to go and figure out how those issues, how the information around that issues enters your process, then how it is shared among the individuals on your team, and then how it is addressed. And you're looking for ways to optimize those steps as you move through those processes. So there you have it. That is the first step of optimally using a building automation system. With that being said, in next week's episode, we are going to talk through the second step, where we're going to get back to the basics. We're going to talk about creating a standard, a building automation standard. We're going to talk about what needs to go into it. We're going to talk about going and using the 3-click or 4-click rule in graphics. We're going to talk about user management strategies, alarm strategies, reporting strategies, all sorts of fundamental things that should be built into your building automation system so that it can be effectively used as a building automation system, not as a building hand system, not as a, oh crap, it's another alarm, let's acknowledge it system, but a automation system that takes effort and responsibility off of you and automates it. So with that being said, thank you so much for listening to this episode. Really look forward to seeing your responses at buildingautomationmonthly.com/126. And once again, at the bottom right-hand corner of every screen, at least if you're on your desktop, you will be able to click on the orange button and record a voice message, and we will be able to respond to that in future episodes. Thanks a ton for being here, and look forward to talking to you in next week's episode, where we will be talking about part 2 of this series, and we'll be getting back to the basics of managing and utilizing a building automation system. Thanks a ton. Take care.